Juana Alicia describes herself as a muralist, printmaker, educator, activist, and painter who loves to draw. Her murals are epic pieces that adorn building walls. Her prints helped carry the voice of the Chicano movement, and her lessons are taught to both migrant workers and scholars alike. She's a people's artist, and her inspiration to draw first came to her while making crafts with her mother and sisters.
My first memories of actually drawing were cutting out paper dolls with my mother. And she would put butcher paper on the kitchen floor. And we would sit there and draw. Monitas, like little girls, girl figures I remember drawing with my mom and my sister. But I didn't think of myself as an artist.
Juana Alicia was surrounded by great art as a young girl growing up in Detroit.
I grew up with the Diego Rivera images, and we had some Kati Kollwitz. So I grew up with the Rivera and Kollwitz were the two artists I remember from my childhood.
By high school, Juana Alicia knew she wanted to be in the arts, so she enrolled at the vocational high school with the best art programs called Katz Technical High School.
I wasn't in the visual arts, I was in the performing arts. I was a dancer when I was a teenager. Very interested in dance. But for some reason, I had a friend who dragged me into the fashion illustration class. And there was a woman there, Dr. Cleety Collins Taylor, who became a godmother for me. She is a fabulous spirit. She's run a gallery in downtown Detroit for 50 years called Arts Extended, focusing on African American art. And it was through Cleety's encouragement that I started really drawing.
At age 15, Juana Alicia began to devote herself to the arts.
I started going more and more to the Detroit Art Institute where the murals were, and eventually dropped out of high school. I went to Black Panther meetings. I was heavily, influenced by the Black Panthers. There were very few Chicanos around. My cultural milieu, I feel I was very fortunate to grow up in such a multicultural environment. At the time, I think probably the strongest influence, of course, was African American culture, Black culture. I'd go to the Detroit Art Institute, I'd see Romary Bearden's work, Jacob Lawrence, and Siegel. George Siegel's sculptures were there. I remember seeing those. So those were the influences that I saw when I was growing up. And of course, music was so big, Everybody partied in the streets, the car windows were open, you sat in your car, Motown was happening, Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, those were, hey, that was, And so it was a very rich exposure that I had.
Juana Alicia's experience with the Black Panthers echoed her mother's social activism. Together, they became involved with the farm workers movement, joining the United Farm Workers Union. It was then that Juana Alicia started drawing posters for the UFW. Shortly after, she received an invitation.
I met Cesar Chavez when he was on a national tour. I went to hear him speak. I'd been doing posters for the union, boycott grapes, AMP markets. And he invited me to come to Salinas to work for the union, to organize. And to work for El Malcriado, the newspaper.
Juana Alicia took the invitation and left Detroit to move to California in the early 1970s.
So it was like a cultural awakening. Like, for me, aside from going to Texas in the summers to visit my father's family and, occasionally crossing the border, Mexico was an elaborate fantasy. It was not something immediate, and there were no other Mexicanos around. There were a lot of Puerto Ricanos in Detroit. And then going to Salinas, it was like a rebirth, Oh my God. And why would I want to be in the office, pushing paper with a bunch of white college students when I could be in the fields and having this more immediate and meaningful experience. So that's what I did. I went to work in the fields.
In Salinas, Juana Alicia looked for other artists who shared her passion for art and heritage.
Salinas was very much a backwater provincia when I moved there. The farmworker movement was very strong. There were poets, but there wasn't a lot of visual art happening. I felt very isolated there. And in Watsonville, there was a group of a couple of guys called the Tortuga Patrol that painted murals. And then there were a couple of guys in Santa Cruz who were painting murals. And again, you know, they were interested in me socially. It was more, you know, an issue of gender.
Eventually, Juana Alicia was able to get involved with other Chicana artists.
So when there was a Chicana women's organization formed in Watsonville, that was very exciting to me. I was like, oh, thank God, you know. And they had a couple women's conferences. I did a couple posters for those. And then when but in that time I had visited San Francisco and I had seen the Mujeres Muralistas. Actually, I think I met them at a party on 24th Street the first time. Irene Perez, Esther Hernandez, Graciela Carrillo, Susan Cervantes, Patricia Rodriguez, and Consuelo Mendez. And I thought, oh my God, these women are painting murals. They're all Latin. Susan's not a Latina, but the rest of them, all Latinas. Oh my God.
She was inspired by seeing the Chicana muralist work and knew it was what she wanted to do.
And I saw them then painting the mural Para el Mercado that was in protest of the McDonald's going in at 24th and Mission. And I was so jazzed. I mean, I was already inspired by Rivera. I decided that left such a strong impression on me. You know, I think that's really when I started drawing it too, was when I was hanging out and looking at the Detroit Industry mural. And I thought, wow, you know, this is what I want to do. I want to make monumental images that, you know, speak to people, that are educational, that, you know, reach through time, that are architectonic, you know, that deal with all of the cultures that I'm living in. You know, what a fabulous thing. That riveted me.
Juana Alicia pursued her own dream. She painted 13 murals with students in Watsonville, quit working in the fields, got into a migrant teaching course, and went to college at UC Santa Cruz.
I was a single mom and went to UC Santa Cruz and got my BA there, and then I got 3 teaching credentials and a postgraduate degree in bilingual education. And I finished my graduate degree in bilingual education at UC Berkeley because I moved from Watsonville to San Francisco in like 1981.
Having taught for more than 25 years, Juana Alicia has perfected her technique of turning an idea into a complete mural.
The first thing that I do is I go and look at the site. And so, you know, a lot of the intent of my work is to humanize the environment, to do something on a monumental scale that brings the human scale in. You know, that I love the use of the human figure, something that makes us have a relationship with the architecture, explodes the architectural surface in some way so that it becomes a different reality and a magical reality.
While working at the UC San Francisco Medical Center, Juana Alicia had a personal relationship with the site.
In this case, my goddaughter had received a kidney from her mother last April. My goddaughter went from leaving death's door to complete vibrancy as soon as she got the new kidney, and my comadre went from being in perfect health to going because, you know, she lost her kidney and she, you know, her body was basically invaded to save her daughter's life. But both of them pulled through wonderfully, and it was such a miraculous experience. And the whole medical staff, the nurses, the doctors, everybody, they asked our family if we prayed, And Sophia, my goddaughter, said, I do now. You know, and it was just very amazing, transformative experience to be there. And though I'd used the medical center for its clinics when I lived in the Haight and that kind of thing, I never really had such a profound relationship with it. And then a few months later, the call for artists came out to make the work, and I applied because of that experience and wanting to give something back to that hospital.
Before Juana Alicia executes a mural, she extensively researches the project and the community. For her mural in Erie, Pennsylvania, at the United Electrical Machine Workers Union, Local 506, she interviewed and sent surveys to the community.
It was a mural for the two unions, the Mexican Union Confederation, the FAT, the Frente Auténtico del Trabajo, and the United Electrical Workers of America Union, that did international exchanges, and they sent workers to each other's sites on both sides of the border. It was called Crossing Borders, their international workers exchange program. You know, I interview whoever will be interviewed. I talk to people on the street, I email the whole committee, and whoever comes forward, it's sort of a self-selection process. Who wants to be involved in the creation of this piece?
Juana Alicia's process of making a mural is extensive, even before the drawing has begun.
My pedagogical process is very tied to my art-making process. I've co-founded a school in Oakland in 1995 called Urban Arts. And we came up with a pedagogical model called CRAFT. Contact, conocimiento, where you get to know everybody in the working group for making work of community art. Research, where everybody distributes the labor and goes out and does the research on what the project is going to be. Que sea mural, una pieza de teatro, lo que sea. And then the action is the middle step, where you're actually making the artwork. And then there's follow through, which is the care and feeding of the artwork, its promotion, its presentation, its preservation, etc. And then there's teaching, where each one teaches one. So it's each one learns a process and teaches someone else the process. So I use that, and in the research part, I look for the myths, the maps, and the metaphors of the community that I'm working with. So that's what I do when I'm researching a piece, and then I dream about it, and I spend a lot of time, in thought and dream and fantasy before I can come up with a design, because usually it has to have some sort of organizing principle.
A prolific artist, Juana Alicia has worked on numerous murals, most of which are in Northern California's Bay Area.
One of the most important projects that I ever did, the Women's Building, and this was a collective project with 6 other women, and we designed it together. And they asked us to do a history of women. And Irene Perez, one of the Mujeres Muralistas, Susan Cervantes, Miranda Bergman, who I painted murals with in Nicaragua, Edith Boone, who's a wonderful muralist and organizer from Harlem originally, lives in Berkeley, Mira Desai, who's South Asian, Indian, and Yvonne Littleton, who's also an African American from San Francisco. They put the 7 of us together and said, go. And we didn't all know each other and hadn't worked together before. And it was very exciting, a wonderful project. And it was quite an amazing collaboration for the cooperation between the women and the monumentality of the project and the support from the community. After that, I went on and did the mural with Emmanuel Montoya at the San Francisco International Airport. It's very interesting. The mural, it's called Santuario, or Sanctuary, and it's dedicated to Lucien Bloch and Stephen Dimitrov. And Stephen was my teacher. He taught me how to do fresco, he and Lucien. They were Diego's assistants at the Detroit Art Institute. And little did I know, when I was in high school, or not in high school, looking at the mural, that I was looking at my future teacher.
A new mural, La Llorona Sacred Waters, represents issues of being a Chicana Latina artist at the beginning of the 21st century. It replaces one of Juana Alicia's earlier murals.
The Lechugueras mural that I did in 1983, which really deals with farm worker issues, the issues of the environment. It's an homage to the beauty of the people who put the food on the tables of not only California, but the whole nation. And a critique of the wanton use of pesticides on people and the environment, and its threat to, women in particular and their children. But it's also, I think, symbolic of my own maturation. I think that during the 60s and 70s, we were quite forced by our need to name ourselves as a people, by the need to identify ourselves, the identity politics that grew out of that, and the need to reclaim ourselves and to claim our own dignity, to give ourselves a name as Chicanos and Chicanas. But it's more specifically about Chicano nation or Mexican American nation. It's the rolling hills of the Salinas Valley. It's the lettuce machine. It's very specific to the geography of California.
The new work took a broader view.
The Llorona Sacred Waters is an international theme. It's about women in 4 or 5 different sites in the world, in leadership, struggling around issues of water, ecology, saving the environment, and their at-risk youth. The Llorona is one of the protagonists in the image. I think really the central image is the Chalchihuitlicue, the goddess of water from Aztec pantheon. So the Llorona mural really speaks to those issues. It goes from the militarized border at Juarez, where over 400 women have been killed and their murders have never been solved because probably the collusion of sexism, pornography, black market trade in women, the mafia, the corruption of the governments on both sides of the border, and patriarchy in general cooperating to keep this from getting solved, right? And then the image of the fence, and I'm going to have cuantos más, cuantos muertos más, and men and women who try to cross the border and die in the process in the desert or from the U.S. military, the helicopter, and then the counterbalancing force of the lechuza or the owl, which is also the Llorona's symbol. And then here the Llorona rescuing her at-risk child from the water and redeeming the image of this woman who's been the victim, blame the victim, the laberinto de soledad, and the whole Octavio Paz idea that somos los chingados and we have no self-worth because our identity is mixed, to reclaiming a mixed identity and saying, we have richness in that, and we're that doesn't mean que somos los condenados, actually there's redemption possible in that, and that women shouldn't be blamed for the conquest.
Juana Alicia is widely known as a mural artist and continues to create new murals that respond to her artistic influences and the world around her.
Diego had such a strong influence on me that I've always felt that people should have art everywhere in their lives, that it's a necessity, it's not a luxury, and that it should be not something we have to pay for, and that poor people should have it.
The mural process takes months to complete, yet Juana Alicia does these projects with hope for the communities that she's working for.
When I'm trying to make a mural for communities, I ask, what are the deepest threats and challenges to this community, and what are the highest values that we hold in common? And I try to use the mural to bridge those two things, to construct a hope for the future.